Great, thank you so much. Well, we're delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting us, Eric, and we're so glad to be here to talk to you about this topic. And we hope you never have to know more than we're sharing with you today. This was a really dark winter, so we're glad to be in a new season, both meteorologically and also appears to be politically as far as ice enforcement in Minnesota at the moment. But a lot happened that is worth sharing. It had a very profound impact on adult education and on our work, and we want to be sure these stories are told, and that for those of you who may face similar enforcement in your communities, that you have some ideas on how you might prepare. So, our presentation is Minnesota Responds: Adult Education During Increased Immigration Enforcement, and I'm Patsy Egan, and we'll just do a little introduction here before we get going. Anne, do you want to tell us who you are and your role?
Thank you so much for inviting us to come and share what kind of happened as it pertained to adult education programs in the state of Minnesota. My name is Ann Trokel, and I am the program manager at a program in West Central Minnesota, so a couple of hours west of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And then I'm also serving as the president of Literacy Action Network, which is an advocacy professional organization for employees and those affiliated with adult education in Minnesota. So,
Very good. Thank you, Anne. Yeah, LAN, as we call it, Literacy Action Network, does all the hard work of lobbying for funding at the state level, and we're so glad for all of the advocacy work that they do. My name's Patsy Egan. I work at Hamline University, which is a small liberal arts college in St. Paul, which, if you're familiar at all with the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul are really just one large metro area, and St. Paul just directly across the Mississippi River from Minneapolis. And Hamlin holds the professional development grant for Minnesota's adult education workforce. So we do all the professional development for the state for adult education. So we're connected to Anne's program and all of the programs throughout the state. And my particular background is in ESL, so this hit in a particular way, of course, because our refugee and immigrant background students were particularly targeted. So we want to start with you finding your keyboards and bring you into the space a little. When we say Operation Metro Surge, are you familiar with what we're referring to? And if so, what are a couple of words that come to mind for you? Go ahead and use the chat. We just want to have a sense of what this meant to those. We have found that it was very much on the minds of some people and very, very closely followed, and in other times not. So thanks for playing along so we know what to expect. Well, feel free to continue to post there. It looks like there's a range of familiarity, so that's really helpful for us to know. For some of you, you'll have some sense of what happened, and for others of you, this might be new information. And that has been our experience, is that while it was very much took over our lives for a couple of months, that was not the case. Of course, we don't have like a shared news experience anymore, so that has shifted in our world.
I do think it is possible as we begin to sort of share what was happening in the state of Minnesota. You may not have heard of the term Operation Metro Surge, but you may start to see, oh yeah, I was aware of
Yeah,
some of what was happening, just maybe not the term Operation Metro Surge. So.
that makes a lot of sense for sure. So we also just want to offer this question: if there's something specific that you would like us to address. Operation Metro Surge, of course, referring to increased immigration enforcement in Minnesota that took place in for the most part, January and February of this year. And also just note this is an online conference. Is there anyone who was here in Minnesota this winter? Because we would want to include you in our remarks. We'll give you a moment to respond in the chat.
Oh, you switch.
We appreciate you, Eric. Eric was generous enough to do a podcast episode with us earlier this year, and it felt good to be heard. So much was happening, and I think it was so easy to turn the channel or to turn the page of the newspaper, and this was good to have that moment where we were asked about it. Well, if something does come up that you'd like us to address, please feel free to either unmic or to put something in the chat here. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you, Larissa. Yeah, that and we'll talk a little bit about the mutual aid efforts as they were called to really help our neighbors get what they needed during this time. Yeah. Do you want to say more?
Just that I know that that their child just said that people were very frightened and unable to do or afraid to do many of the everyday tasks, and that the community did really rally around them and try to reduce their fear or reduce their the necessity of them going into areas where they were more afraid.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you to your friend's child. So here's what we will tackle here. We want to just give you a little context for what took place. It really started early December, but then the height of it was January, February. And then what was the impact on Minnesota's adult basic education programs, these families and staff members? And then we have some compiled advice for other states that we were able to just ask around to other programs, to managers, to staff members, and compiled a document that we'll share with you to let people know if you are experiencing or expecting increased immigration enforcement in your community, what are some things you might expect to happen as an adult education provider, and how might you prepare for that or respond to that? Just given what we learned, it may look different in your context, but we want to share what we learned from it, which was quite a bit. And then, of course, some time for questions and some additional resources that we've compiled as well. And throughout, I know the two of us and Eric will be keeping an eye on that chat. So anything you want to add, Anne?
Nope, you covered it.
Right. So first, just a heads up. Some of what we're going to share is hard to hear. We're not going to share videos of terrible things happening. However, um, this was a really violent, tragic, sad time, and just want to be sure that's on your radar as we move into this presentation. So if you need to step away, do that. We trust you to take care of yourselves. But this was a really rough experience for us, but most especially for our students and neighbors who were particularly vulnerable. So we want to share first what happened. So Operation Metro Surge began December 4th, technically, and moved very intensely through February of 2026. And it looked like this. It was a really lot of very well-armed, masked men, mostly, moving through the city. It was the largest immigration enforcement operation in US history. And about 3,000 federal agents, ICE, and also Customs Border Protection, and they were from the Department of Homeland Security, were deployed to the Twin Cities area. And again, Twin Cities is the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But to be clear, they were elsewhere as well, not just in the city, but concentrated, at least at first, in Minneapolis. There were a lot of arrests. There was a lot of fear, and there was just a great deal of upheaval during this time. So this is what was happening. And if you've been to the Midwest, you get winter there too. Like it was freakishly cold, and then this happened, and there were about 3 to 4 thousand arrests, and that's a ridiculous number of like, is it 3,000 or is it 4,000? And part of the reason is the numbers are so hard to tell because they have not been particularly transparent in how they have been reporting arrests. And then it's hard to decide, is this an arrest? Is this a detainment? Is this a deportation? Like there's a lot of different ways that people are talking about what happened. And a lot of folks that were in fact detained were released very shortly after because they had no reason to be detained. So just for context, there are only 600 Minneapolis police officers. So imagine 3,000 federal agents coming into this space, right? So it was an incredibly large amount of federal agents wandering the streets with automatic weapons. So you probably heard there were 2 civilians shot and killed by federal agents, both of which were caught, of course, on lots and lots of phones. And at least one detainee died while in ICE custody. So Renee Good was shot and killed while doing what was called observation, just peaceful observation. And that was on January 7th. And then Alex Pretty is an ICU nurse at the local Veterans Administration, was killed later that month in January. These are pictures just I took of their memorials within a couple weeks of those murders. And they continue to this day to have, they've had to consolidate because they were sprawling for several blocks, but they've become quite a place of pilgrimage. And then you probably saw photos of this little boy, Liam, in the little blue bunny hat. He is 5 years old and was also detained, and that made some headlines. There was a lot of headlines around the use of pepper spray and gas and such, and other ways that generally we don't see law enforcement using against civilians. So I'm just going to pause there and like deep breath. All of that's really hard, right? And that is kind of what was going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And as we move into thinking about the community response, and anything that looked different to you where you were. I was in the Twin Cities and was not far away, but in a more rural area.
There, yeah, we were sort of just had a sort of a front row seat to what was happening in the metro area versus in greater Minnesota at the, early January and even in December. Our feeds of news were filled with, and when you live just a couple hours away, it's likely your family members, other programs that you're in close contact with that are serving as students that were directly being impacted by what was happening, and then how it was impacting everyone, communities as a whole, neighbors, neighborhoods, and so forth. So it was pretty remarkable to be hit with these kinds of images all day long, every single day, just right there, right in your state, right in an area you're familiar with. So
Yeah. I should add that the arrests were quite violent. People were being dragged from their vehicles. People were afraid to leave if they looked in any way foreign. I don't know, whatever that's supposed to look like. So Anne has a story of someone who they didn't bring their passport to school. Do you want to share that?
yeah, as the month of January went on, we had some students that were here at in-person classes and just suddenly standing up, realizing they absolutely needed to go home now because they changed coats And the coat that they wore, they did not have their proof of citizenship or their passport with them. And just immediately feeling a sense of, I have to leave. I cannot believe I am out of my house without this proof. Um, just kind of terror-filled moments that
Yeah.
we had never really seen before.
Yeah. And I think you had such a good point at one point we were talking that if you have any question as to what privilege is, it's like, did you have to check whether or not had your passport with you when you left the house in January of 2026? And if you didn't, you have something others don't. So my children are children of immigrants, but they look like me, right? I wasn't worried about them. The immediate concern and the reason so many agents were deployed in December at first was a rather lengthy rant from the president about Somali students, of which we have a really large number. So at first that was the targeted population, and then it just, of course, sprawled from there. Pivoting now to though that the community response was extraordinary. So if there is any light in this story, it is what happened next. So this was the day before Alex was killed. And I just mentioned it was 20 degrees below zero with the wind chill. So 50,000 people spent several hours, I'm there somewhere, outside marching through downtown Minneapolis in protest of the ICE activity in the state. I and anyone there had no idea how many people were there until we saw the drone footage later. And there was such an extraordinary response from the community of like, nope, not here. These are our neighbors.
These gatherings were happening across the state. There were people in, 2 hours away, like I am, who drove there to participate. And there were many small communities where if you were driving from A to B, you would see probably to scale, maybe the same percentage of people standing on the side of the
Yeah.
road, uh,
And
drawing
then like
attention
every
to.
suburb had their own version of it for those who didn't want to go downtown. So just a little sense of what obviously this was a different day because they're dressed quite differently, but there were any number of marches happening and people taking part in protests and really just standing up for what was going on. We probably will skip this for now, but there was quite a response with the singing resistance. And if we have time, we can come back and tell you more about that. So, sorry, go
The
ahead.
singing resistance is something that was very, very interesting in a state with a deep choral tradition. So many, many people came together and found comfort in um, their joy of being able to express themselves through song. And one remarkable evening, there was a group I believe, in downtown Minneapolis, outside of a hotel. I don't know if that's the video that you posted, Patsy.
This is for our neighbors who are locked inside. Together we will abolish ICE. This is for our neighbors who are locked inside.
So this was a group of about 1,000 people who were just singing outside of the hotels where some of the ICE agents were housed.
Another song that came together was about it being okay to change your mind. And they sang this in the middle of the night outside of a hotel where it was believed that agents were staying. And this idea that it's never too late to change your mind. The more you know. So.
Yeah. Unsurprisingly, no ICE agents came and joined our protest that day, but we tried. So it felt so good just in the midst of so much fear and violence and turmoil in a community that is known for being quite peaceful, to have this sort of solidarity. So none of this is normal. None of this is okay. And none of this makes Minnesota any safer. And I lift up Governor Walz because none of this was about immigration either. Um, Minnesota has very, very few undocumented immigrants compared to many, many other places, but we were the ones who had 3,000 ICE agents. And our governor is, of course, ran against Trump in the last election. So let's think about what was the impact on Minnesota adult education programs and families and staff. Anne, what do you want to say?
I think this slide is, probably a really good place to start. And this idea that fear is the thief of focus really kind of captures what it means to be sort of operating in a crisis, right? And here you'll see a quote from the 2015 Teacher of the Year, who's reminding us like what our goal is and how difficult that is to achieve when your day-to-day existence is you're just on such unsolid ground. So as Patsy had said, the Operation Metro Surge I technically began in December, and the last time that Patsy and I talked about this was the end of March, and so it's interesting to be now revisiting this same kind of the framework of a presentation and a conversation that we've had a couple of times over the last few months, to be thinking about it now in the middle of May and looking back. We certainly, some things are a little more clear about the impact, and some things I think we won't know the full impact for quite some time. But at this time, what we know just statewide is that student contact hours we were ahead by about 8% in December of 2025. So the average across the state is that more students or the students were spending more time with ABE this last contact hour year. And as that year ended at the end of April, we are projecting that that's back at 0% increase. So we went from an 8% increase to nothing. So it was erased in sort of the final part of the third quarter and part of the fourth quarter of ABE programming this last year. In early January, as things were really ramping up and our feeds of information, whether that was social media, the local news, however we were getting it, we were just kind of bombarded with images of violent detainments. There were recordings, and some of which we witnessed with our own eyes in our communities, in particular in the metro area, but even in greater Minnesota, we were seeing video of these violent detainments happening. And so really staff and students were under an immense amount of stress. Word was rapidly spreading, videos were being shared, and so we just were operating in crisis mode again. And so some of how it felt was a little bit like what it felt as we shifted our programming during the pandemic, and yet it was in many ways a lot more intense than that. So we at the program that I manage, one of our biggest sites is in a town about a couple of hours west of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And there was a violent detainment of a 19-year-old high school student in downtown. On a Monday afternoon. There were many, many people on the streets in downtown that day that happened to report it. Um, so the images, the video, the image of a single shoe being left behind as she was detained and then gone for 4 days, her family not having any idea where she was. She came here as a refugee, had legal status, and it just rocked our community. And our daily in-person English classes, the attendance dropped by 75% that week. So we went from about 40 students to 8 that came to the building. I was really grateful for the things that we learned about programming during the pandemic and the things that we retained and kept going, like our online offerings. They are not as robust, are not still to this day, are not as robust as what we offer for face to face, but we did have the capacity to, accommodate the students that called and said, I cannot leave my house. I will not leave my house. Can I join online? Um, some programs in the metro area reported as many as 25 or more students that were detained. Those were early February numbers. So at this point, I I don't have follow-up information. I just know it was pretty remarkable what we were seeing happening. Uh, Students were, um, some programs that serve a lot of students that come to the United States as refugees. Those are some of the most documented, screened, and the most vetted students and people that come to the United States, and they were um, particularly vulnerable. The federal government knows their address, knows their family members. This, just really was a remarkable, remarkable thing to think back upon. What we were, trying to program and support our students through, and in many scenarios, our staff members.
Yeah.
So things like switching to online happened overnight and over the weekend for programs. Though programs that had done that kind of programming during the pandemic were best, prepared and most ready to do it. But it was it was a real challenge and delivering devices. We found ourselves connecting students to all sorts of basic needs programs, or our programs themselves were starting to develop those. So, Patsy, if you have anything you want to add for
Yeah.
kind of talking about the impact.
Right. I think what I would add only is that something that I think is often not understood is that the students who are being detained, it had it often had nothing to do with their immigration status. They were being picked up left and right for little reason at all, only to be shown that they were here perfectly legally, oftentimes were US citizens, and then released later in the day, or many of our students that were detained were sent within 24 hours to a facility in Texas, a detention facility, and then were released, but released in Texas and had no means of returning. So there were, buses and vans going to Texas, bringing people back who had no reason to have been arrested or detained in the first place, right? So there was lack of access to attorneys. There was lack of access to spiritual care. Chaplains were not let in to the Whipple building near the airport where people were being held before they were getting on planes. And it was such a chaotic time. Someone put chaos as their word earlier in the webinar, and that is absolutely how it felt. Even people who were born here were being picked up and taken and not given the means to contact their families. So the fear was not just for those who had some sort of legal reason to be concerned. The legal reasoning, if you can even call it that, had little to bear on whether or not someone was vulnerable to being targeted by ICE.
Yeah, as students were reporting being followed, um, and at times it appeared that they were being followed and that maybe they were being tracked by their license plate, sometimes being pulled over and violently detained, and other times being pulled over and questioned without being violently detained. It was, yeah, remarkable. We I think ABA programs are pretty great at connecting students to other programs, other experts, right? We know in our normal everyday work, we know where to help you find assistance with heat and energy. We know where to help you find access to food. We know. So this was just all of that and even more, right? It was not. So we were grateful for the ways that we knew how to connect our students, but we found ourselves um, with things like helping students understand they might want to have um, a DOPA in place. So did I know what a DOPA was? No, I did not. But this is a delegation of parental authority, right? So not helping a student fill out forms that we are not the experts of, but rather trying to help them find who might help them complete that kind of, and what the benefit of having that would be.
Yeah, I'll just add this photo on the slide was taken. This happens to be my partner. We were, many people were involved with patrolling entrances to schools. So several times a week, we would just hang out near the entrance of the adult ed program in my neighborhood and just open the door for students and watch the parking lot and, just be there, more for, I think, psychological safety than anything else. And I liked the fact that they had these little safety patrol jackets that are clearly not meant for adults, but here we are. And then they put a big red heart on the back so that people knew that we were safe. But this happened to be at one of those DOPA trainings that Anne was speaking of. So, just the idea that you'd have to go to a school, risk leaving your home during this time in order to sign a document saying, who can take care of my child if I disappear today?
Mm-hmm.
And just like let that sink in for a second. So there were, and the adult education programs were finding notary publics and attorneys and translators to help people get this signed. Let me know when you're ready for that next slide.
Yeah, I think we can move to the
Yeah.
next slide. I think all the way back to January of 2025, programs were hosting and sharing information about Know Your Rights. So they might have had little red cards that they were sharing in multiple languages. We, shared that information and then found ourselves rapidly moving to share that information again in January of 2026. There were across the state, lots of groups of legal observers or constitutional observers that were coming together and watching and kind of recording what was happening, tracking what was happening in communities. This sometimes, this was a really great thing. This was an amazing thing that neighbors kind of stepped up to do, but it also at times created some confusion. I know there were a couple of times where programs were trying to figure out who was watching the building, who were those, who were the people in those cars? Were they agents watching buildings? Were they observers watching buildings? I mean, everybody was kind of on edge about everything. So there were programs that launched food delivery, food donation, toiletry kits, helping community members get access to medicine, rides to doctor's appointments, rides to schools for their children. There just was a lot of pretty amazing things that were happening. So uh, and the kind of the vast majority of the students it was not a concern about whether or not they were legally here. It was more about being someone perceived as and immigrant or a person of color, I suppose. We were grateful that we had built up our, you know, technology and lending library, which includes iPads and Chromebooks. I know other programs too. We're grateful that they had built those up during the pandemic and kind of continued that. So we delivered devices, but there were all sorts of implications because of the way that the immigration or the ICE activity was the strategies that they were using. So there were some fears around, having new volunteers work with programs to deliver things, whether or not that if you yourself had been followed or pulled over, what would that mean if you were delivering things to others? Would that bring a risk that maybe we were not willing to take? Like, what were the workarounds for that? Where I live, our program was doing more connecting our students to those groups of people that were doing that. Our program itself was not delivering unless people were doing that when they were not at work. They certainly might have been. So.
I'll just chime in too. One of the precautions that you mentioned was anyone who was doing the rapid response, which was like on the signal chat, getting information about where ICE was in the neighborhood and following up and bringing whistles and alarming people around so that people would know that ICE was present, were asked not to do any food delivery or observation work, so that because there was quite an intricate response from ICE about tracking vehicles and such. So they got quite savvy about figuring out who was who. So it looks like there's an upcoming session about some of these issues as well. And then the thing I think I want to lift up for this group in particular, since you're all working in adult education and literacy, is that our students trust us. These families trust us, right? There was just an extraordinary amount of, what do I do? How do I keep my family safe? Where should I go for food? Is this okay? Like, can I go here? Is this person okay to let into my home? Like, so I think really this whole experience highlighted the role that adult education has outside of the teaching and learning that we do. For example, some of the grocery delivery, that was just an intricate web of mutual care that was happening throughout the state and intensely in the cities. ESL teachers in particular, and then in K-12 as well as adult ed, of course, couldn't make all these deliveries themselves. So they would, a staff member, a friend of mine's an ESL teacher at a high school, my son was driving for them, but the families wouldn't know my son, but they knew the ESL teacher. So the first time she went with him, and the next time he would go by himself, right? So like they would introduce a new person's like, here's what he looks like, he's safe, next time he'll come on his own, so there was just this kind of interdependent and growing web of care that was spreading throughout the cities. That was really quite phenomenal. It was excruciatingly sad and at the same time really heartwarming to see how much people were stepping up. Let's see. So I'll just pause there if there are specific questions about what was just shared. Otherwise, we'll go through a couple of resources that we have for you.
How is the situation in Minneapolis now?
Yeah, good question. It has calmed down significantly. I understand there is still a presence and there is still some activity, but I would say by the end of end of February, it had largely moved into suburban areas and then dissipated considerably. I don't know where they've gone. I'm sure they haven't gone away. They're just in other communities, right? So I have colleagues in Arizona that have seen increased activity, and colleagues in Salt Lake who've said the same thing. Maybe you know more. I'd be curious if someone knows more. But in my community, we have not seen much activity in recent weeks. Anne, how about you?
Yeah,
Thank
same.
you.
I can only say in New Jersey, just about, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, one of my students in the middle of class, she was very concerned and pulled out a video of just a few streets away. They were doing an arrest, and there were children crying in the car, and because there are these video networks of things going on, and So I don't think it's happening on the same scale here in the Asbury Park area of New Jersey, but it is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. And I think you're right. I think after what happened with Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy, I think um, obviously a lot of change in leadership in those agencies and some change in tactics and things I think have gotten more subtle. I don't think they're any better, but I think they've become such that they're not making the news, I guess is how I would put it. So there's some resources I just put in the chat, and I'm actually just gonna pull it over so we can look at it together. Make it a smidge bigger here. So Atlas is the agency I direct that we do professional development, literacy action network, and is with, of course. The slides from today are linked here. This is the advice from other providers that was compiled that's advice for other states. So that's linked here as well. Things like safety first, move online, do it today, right? Like if that they're not gonna come in person. So be ready to move online immediately. And just reiterating that, of course, safety is not optional. We've done a lot of work around trauma-informed care and trauma-informed instruction, and I'll share a few resources in a bit. But so this advice document is linked. I'll just go back to the resources. You've got our contact information here, that podcast episode we mentioned as well. We've had a handful of statements that came out. The Minnesota Teachers of English issued a statement on January 29th. TESOL, the International TESOL, issued a statement in support of that as well. Just like it was nice to, I give it because it's nice to see, right? That people were noticing. The National Coalition for Literacy also issued a statement in support of multilingual learners and their families in Minnesota during this time. Some rights and workplace items here, safety plans. And then I included this because we ended up doing quite a lot of workshops and professional development around how to be a leader in an anxious time like this. So if you're in a role where you're coordinating or in a program where you're working with others around how to respond in a crisis, some of these might be helpful. And then here's some of our trauma-informed work as some webinars as well as a study circle guide that you're welcome to take and run with. And then there is no moving this away from the equity work that we do. So here are some resources around anti-racism and healing and avoiding this burnout, etc. So all of that is here for you. And I think I just want to point out the Cultural Competency Library that's also linked on there. I already mentioned the trauma-informed, what we're now calling healing-centered resources. We also have a collection of lessons for adult learners that are what we're calling Teaching for Justice. So there's a whole wide range of lesson topics, but there is one on Know Your Rights. There are things like what is an executive order? And then there's unrelated to ICE, but just related to current political climate. What's going on with the national parks, for example, things like that. And we keep adding to those. And those are linked in the slides. These little moving equity forward videos, they're just like 10 or 12-minute videos on little short topics like funds of knowledge, what's translanguaging, like some of those kinds of topics. And then we have a new equity rubric that we're implementing as well. And these are all linked on your slides here. But we have these two questions. Anne, do you want to lift those up for folks?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, it's an interesting place to be now. Looking back, we did, I can't help but think about some of the ways that we processed after the pandemic, and the ways, especially as a program manager or someone who has the bigger picture and designs programming, how important it is to take and to take from those times of crisis and think, what what who are we now, and what should we retain from that? What things did we do because of an emergency that are things we want to spend more time getting better at because they reduce barriers, help us be able to serve students regardless of an emergency, to keep those lifelines open to students. So when I think about our ability to either switch to high flex programming or switch to online programming, to retain or keep online programming, some percentage of programming offered that way. I'm grateful that when the pandemic ended, we did not say, oh, we're done with that now. We kept that going. It served us well this last winter. It made a big difference in our students' lives, and it is something that even when it isn't not as financially sustainable, it still is something that's worth considering because of what it can do for you for students with lots of barriers, and then also in times of crisis. The connections that we made this winter with just building our knowledge around the circumstances around proof of citizenship or legal status of students, the partnerships that we made, being aware of, like I mentioned, being aware of what a DOPA is and how our knowledge of that might be beneficial moving forward, regardless of a huge crisis like Operation Metro Surge. It still is something that we become more resourceful, or more of a resource, I should say, for our students. So,
Thank you. I would say in my role in professional development, because I get to work at the state level with so many different organizations, one of the things that has lingered with me that I think I knew, but now I really know is um, that we are really so interconnected. Like when someone is hurting, everyone is hurting. And we lost a wonderful senator years back, Paul Wellstone, who used to say, we all do better when we all do better. And that was never more true, right? So that this community, and I actually don't think we're that special. I think we're like this everywhere, that like we will show up for our neighbors. And that this was extraordinary. It was a reminder. I don't think we didn't know this. I just think it was a reminder that people know what is right, and this was not okay. And they responded. Um, there was a tremendous response around like a new definition of what is a neighbor, and that you don't actually have to live next door. So, and that was something that was a wonderful reminder that I hope to keep far into the future.
we also became aware of a term called neighborism, which we felt that particularly in the metro area, but statewide, we really, really saw some pretty remarkable things happening of support of our neighbors, and the ways that we could really step up for each other. And that was one of the best outcomes
Yeah, I would
and
agree.
spots of joy.
So just finally, as we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you if you want to uncover your keyboard again, and what strikes you as something you feel prepared and confident about as far as caring for your students, staff, and families if this were to happen in your neighborhood, and or what's something you're thinking about doing or preparing now, given that this could happen anywhere.
So
Mm.
while folks are thinking and processing,
Mm.
in the chat, um, I just dropped the a direct link to the podcast episode
Thank
that I
you.
did. If you're all interested in it, I do a podcast. Not all of them are about adult ed. Some of them are about adult ed. They're about adult education more generally. They're about education more generally. But so Anna, Patrick, what I was also thinking, because this came up earlier in the conference, like way back in the 90s when we had equipped for the future, right? And what are the roles that adult learners take up, right? So one of them is citizen. And I'm like, we need an update on that. So one of the things that citizens need to be able to do is protect each other from ICE and overbearing police forces, you know.
And show up when you can't leave your house and need
Yes.
to, get something from the store, or you need a ride to work, but you're afraid to park, right? So we know how to do this in a new practical way now.
Yeah.
And we did it. Like, I think that's the other piece that we're quite confident about is, we know how to do that. I hope we never have to do it again, but we know how to do that.
Yeah. And I just dropped the link in the chat for the PD certificate for those of you that need it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and once again, June 25th, the scholarship and award ceremony. Please consider coming to that breakfast. This is a time to be in the same room together and be connect to your neighbors in that way.
Yeah, I think the relationship work you do now pays off tenfold, of course.
Yeah.
With can reach out to someone who lives near your student, or knows someone who can help. Elizabeth, thanks for your comment here.
No, everything helps. I mean, I remember a number of years ago doing a in-person session with students about, you know, if ICE knocks on your door, what are the things that you can say about judicial warrants and, ICE warrants and things like that? And 1 week later, they showed up at somebody's door and their kid was able to be like, nah, and I
Mm-mm.
was trying to talk to the kid being like, oh, it's okay. We just want to come in and talk, and all the techniques that they use to try to get people to open their door.
Yeah.
They're like
And
vampires.
if you have limited English, and
Yeah.
you're feeling threatened, like, it's
Yeah.
super scary. Any of
Yeah.
us would not know how to respond. And the number one line I remember from one of the trainings I went to, um, was just to ask, "Am I free to go?" Like,
Yeah.
just ask, "Am I free to go?" Like, and if you are, then do. So,
Right. Right. The other thing, oh, sorry. And the other thing I think that's important for people to reinforce is that even if you speak English well, like say you're an advanced English, like English language learner, you still don't have to speak in English. If somebody's asking you, you can say like, I want a translator, right? You don't have to engage in English if you don't want to engage in English. It's your right to not engage in English.
a really good point. Yeah.
Sorry,
I
Amy.
was gonna just tell about you made the comment about people going door to door, the strategies that were being used to kind of get people to open their door. We ended up having a side lesson in posting a sign, or in your front window or your front door, saying no soliciting, and what that meant in English, and how that might be um, something that can help differentiate between who's at your door and who's knocking at your door.
Mhm. Good. Yeah. I'll just put our contact information here, and the way I've been signing off on my emails, I'll say to you is, may your city stay out of the headlines.
Yes.
Um, I
Yeah.
just wanted to share one of the things to know as far as like know your rights is that most of the time they'll come with if ICE is coming to like a home or a store, they'll come with an administrative warrant, which really has no legal authority behind it, but they'll try to intimidate people or trick people or whatever. So sharing with people like what is the difference. Um, Yeah, I know that there are groups that are doing that. Like we show people like this is what the warrant signed by a judge would look like, and this is what the administrative warrant looks like, and um, you don't have to let them in with an administrative warrant. It's
Yeah.
just something that's signed by a nice officer.
Right. That's a really good point. And there's some great videos online you can find that show like role played interactions of that. One thing that's tricky is the ICE officers had the word police on their vests. And so we teach students that, oh, if you have a problem, tell the police, right? And of course, did not play well.
I think I don't know if it. I know at least early on, a lot of it hasn't been a lot of our students, but the students that I know of, they were detained when they went to USIS for like appointments.
Mhm.
I've heard that
Um,
too.
so I don't know if there's really anything that we can do to help them except like support their families, you know.
Yeah, I have a friend who works at the federal courthouse too, and he was saying he has a public defender, and they would get the list of people who were expected to come in the next day at like 6 p.m. And they had that evening to try to find them and tell them to come at their appointed time, or else they then could say, well, you didn't show up for your appointment. And then they had reason to detain. So there was some really icky tactics being done.
Yeah, I know we had a student that went in to like do a address change, um, and was detained. So you know, like not expecting that that would happen,
Of
obviously.
course. Right. Well, we really appreciate everyone coming and listening. Sad topic, but gosh, the response was amazing. And the reason we had monarch butterflies on all our slides is that has become quite the symbol of resistance and the right to migration. Of course. Thank you, everyone. We
Yeah.
appreciate your time.